The British government announces a plan to end its lockdown, but there's disagreement from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
We're taking the first careful steps to modify our measures.
But the opposition says it doesn't answer crucial questions, and trade unions call it a recipe for confusion. South Korea faces a second spike in infections just a few days after beginning to ease its own lockdown. Coronavirus infections in Thailand remain surprisingly low, but restrictions are likely to remain in place for the time being. Health officials in the state of New York are investigating 85 cases of children with an inflammatory disease linked to Covid-19. Governor Andrew Cuomo told a news conference that 3 children had died.
This is every mother's nightmare. This is every parent's nightmare. No one knew about it. Nobody was watching for it. You know, it's the same story of this virus from day one. We've notified the CDC. We're watching it for the CDC. The CDC will communicate. But nobody knows that it wasn't here and just not diagnosed because it doesn't look like a COVID case.
And new coronavirus infections are on the rise in Germany, as we've just been hearing, just days after the country eased some lockdown measures. Official figures suggest the number of people that a sick person could infect, that R value, has risen above 1. That means the number of cases is growing. China has confirmed 5 new cases of the virus in Wuhan. That's the original epicenter of the disease. It's the second day running that new cases have emerged from the city. In total, 17 new cases were confirmed across China. That is the highest number for 2 weeks. And in the US, Vice President Mike Pence is reported to be self-isolating after an aide was diagnosed with coronavirus. His press secretary, Katie Miller, has tested positive. Her husband, Stephen, is a senior advisor to the president. The White House hasn't commented on the vice president's self-isolation, but has previously stated that both he and President Trump were being tested daily. Now, one of the many questions being asked is what will happen after countries slowly emerge from lockdowns and whether that could lead to a second wave of infections. Well, that is exactly what's happening in South Korea. It was one of the countries most widely praised for how it responded to the pandemic, but authorities there have reported a spike in cases just as social distancing rules are eased, and it's forced the closure of all clubs and bars in the capital, Seoul. Now, more than half of people globally think their country was far too late in responding to the threat of Covid-19. That's according to a new survey from across 5 continents. But not surprisingly, the picture varies significantly depending on where you look. So China, for example, topped the list with 86% of respondents apparently signalling that they were satisfied by the political response to the pandemic there. Next came Vietnam, followed by New Zealand, where 67% of citizens are pleased with their government's response. At the other end of the scale, though, only 14% of French citizens thought their leaders had done enough. In Hong Kong, even fewer did. That's despite the city recording some of the lowest coronavirus numbers in Asia. And in Japan, just 5% of people surveyed said they were happy with their political leaders.
Meanwhile, in Germany, coronavirus infections there are rising just days after the country eased its lockdown restrictions. The Robert Koch Institute for Disease Control announced the country's COVID-19 reproduction rate, that R rate. Well, that has now risen to 1.1, reflecting an increase in cases. And Brazil's status as a COVID-19 hotspot is growing after the country's health ministry registered just over 10,000 new cases and 751 related deaths. That brings the total number of deaths in Brazil to 9,897.